honoring those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Since May 1st, 1865, when recently enslaved persons went and dug up Union soldiers and gave them a proper burial on what they called Decoration Day in the Gullah Geechee community, till today, Memorial Day 2026, for those brave Americans who have given their life so that all of us can be free. It is more than about hot dogs and parades and hamburgers and of course, watermelons. It's about the freedom that you enjoy. So recognize and put a flag on a grave, fly your flag at half-staff, tie a black ribbon around your flag, because freedom is not free. Courage. Courage is the principle that President John F. Kennedy admired most. My name is Matt Bowman. I spent over 20 years briefing admirals, generals, and senior civilian warfighters on one topic, and that is courage, and that is winning. So today, on the Briefing Room podcast, hosted by myself and Dr. Tyrone Taborn, a community leader in STEM, we are going to talk about the number one thing that all warriors need, and that is courage. This is a show by warriors for warriors. When President Kennedy wrote Profiles in Courage over 50 years ago, he profiled 8 senators who showed courage. This is a time that we live in now for all veterans to stand up and show the world what courage looks like. Thomas Carlyle described courage this way in the foreword to Profiles in Courage. He said, "The courage that we live for is, and the price that we have is not to die decently, but to live manfully." Living in courage is our discussion today. So, before I begin our discussion of courage and what courage looks like, so I want to go around the world in 60 seconds and give you an update on what's going on. Again, this is a show by warriors for warriors. So this morning, President Trump and his senior advisors have sat and decided the plan, the way ahead for what's going to happen in Iran. Will the ceasefire hold? Will the ceasefire end and hostilities begin? In Bolivia, far left organizers have blocked roads and protested across the country against the right-wing president and his austerity measures. Only 6 months in office, and already he has crowds of people calling for his resignation and a change of regime. In Africa, the Ebola virus, which is 100% fatal for 50% of the people who have it, is ravaging the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the Democratic Republic of the Congo right now is almost in a lockdown, a quarantine. As a matter of fact, if you're an American coming back from Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, you have to go through 3 airports: Houston, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C., to be screened for Ebola. In Asia, oil shipments from the United States from the strategic reserves are being released so that Asia will have oil, because the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil is going through, is still locked down. And then in Europe and in Gaza. In Europe, drones from the Ukraine are flying into Russia, and Russia is sending missile attacks into Kiev. In Gaza, over 73,000, mostly Palestinians, have been killed in the conflict that has now continued to rage for over 18 months. So this is the world that we live in, a world of uncertainty, a world of a lot going on. So what are some things that are consistent? Principles of courage, principles of performance, and principles of talent, having the smartest people in the room to solve the world's problems. Here at Becoming Everything You Are, we work really hard to bring the smartest people in the world together. We're an ecosystem of 50,000 scientists, technologists, engineering, mathematicians, and strategists. We have a career day on the second Saturday of every month, where high school students talk to astronauts, to tech inventors. Matter of fact, you can see it better than I can say it. So pay attention to this commercial for our career day.
calling all future STEM pioneers, leaders, and career champions. Join us on every second Saturday of the month for the BEA Career Day. BEA STEM Career Day is all about creating opportunities for students to venture into the world of STEM through the eyes of professionals. You'll meet mentors and presenters that will give you a sneak peek into the many options available to you in the field of STEM. Hosted by teen ambassadors, you'll find yourself among inspiring peers just like yourself that are aiming high for their future. To take part in the BEA STEM Career Day on Zoom, visit fullstemahead.us and register for the next session. Again, that's fullstemahead.us. BEA, becoming everything you are.
A world of careers unleashed. You can get it at Bayer. Become everything you are.
All right, welcome back to the briefing room. This summer, as America celebrates its 250th birthday, we are going to be doing a series called Profiles in Courage. It's modeled after the book by the late President John F. Kennedy, who chronicled 8 senators and their profiles in courage. There are many, many attributes of courage, but at the end of the day, John F. Kennedy described courage this way. It is men and women who are willing to risk themselves, their fortunes, and the well-being of their children for a principle. This is something that's been ingrained in every sailor, soldier, Marine, Coast Guardman, and Guardian from the time that they enlist into the service until the time that they leave service. All veterans understand this. All men and women who are seeking to raise their performance level also understand this. So today, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm a seaman, I'm a sailor, so we believe in sea stories. And this sea story is about a man named Captain Robert Smalls, a Gullah Geechee man from South Carolina, like myself. As a matter of fact, he was born about 30 miles away from where I was born. He was born as a slave on a plantation, and his job was not to pick the fields, but his job was to work in Charleston Harbor. So in April of 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. This treasonous act started the American Civil War. At that time, Robert Smalls was tasked with driving around CSS ships, Confederate ships, ships that carried munitions, weapons, and guns. And he did this for a whole year. So from April 1861 to May of 1862, Captain Robert Smalls learned the port of Charleston. He learned every nuance. He learned the signals. He learned the maps. He learned the navigation. He learned everything about Charleston. And on May 13th, 1862, the captain of the ship decided that he and his crew needed to go to the first bar on the right. So they exited the Confederate ship Planter and they went out on town in Charleston. As they were leaving, Robert Smalls asked the captain, "Hey, sir, since y'all are going to be gone, is it okay if we invite our family and friends to come and see the ship and to eat some of the food?" And the captain agreed. This action set Captain Robert Smalls and his band of valiant warriors in action. So once the families got on board, they waited till 3 in the morning, and then they decided to set sail across the harbor. There are 5 forts, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, including Fort Sumter, one of the most heavily defended forts in the world that separated Robert Smalls from freedom. Capture would have meant death for himself, his children, his wife, and those of the other members of the crew. It would have been the most immediate, horrible death you can possibly imagine. But courage is what he had. So they sailed past the first fort and gave the appropriate signals. They sailed past the second, the third, and the fourth. And as they approached Fort Sumter early in the morning, he was advised, "Hey, we're almost there. Let's steer away from Fort Sumter and not risk getting blown out the water by the cannons." But Robert Smalls had intelligence and he had the willingness to risk it all for freedom. So he stayed on the normal path. He hugged right along the coast within eyesight and sound of Fort Sumter. He put on the captain's hat and dressed like the Confederate officer. He even had a pipe, so he looked in the early morning darkness just like the Confederate captain. He gave the signals. He even waved his hand at the Confederate soldiers, and he sailed past Fort Sumter safely. When he got to the Union blockade, he took a sheet, took down the Confederate flag of the Confederate States of America, and raised a white sheet. And he was accepted by the Union forces. The newspapers at the time went crazy. Here it was, a 23-year-old slave who stole one of the Confederate States of America's top warfighting ships. He absolutely stole it. So he was a hero. The story could have ended there, but that's not what courage requires. Courage requires you to continue on. So he continued on. He left the South and went to Washington, D.C. And when he went to Washington, D.C., they had an audience with President Abraham Lincoln. And President Lincoln asked him one question. He said, should Black slaves be allowed to fight? And they held Robert Smalls as the example of why slaves should be allowed to fight, why Black men should be allowed to fight. And so, as a result of Robert Smalls, 5,000 Black men were raised to help fight for the Union forces against the Confederacy. His one simple act inspired over 179,000 Black Americans to serve in the Union Army during the Civil War, 40,000 of which paid the ultimate sacrifice with their lives. So this is what courage requires. There's 4 C's of courage. And the 4 C's of courage are you have to have the capability. So if you have no capability, it is not true courage. True courage says, I have the ability to make this happen. True courage understands that the second C is consequences, that there are consequences to myself and to my fortune and to my children for getting this wrong. The third C is conviction. You have to have a principle that you operate by so that you can operate on your convictions. And then the fourth one is to know that history, that the centuries will look at your actions and say that you are on the right side of history. So I'll close today's episode with a quote from Sam Houston. And Sam Houston, as many of you know, he's going to be a hero and someone that we profile. Sam Houston said that he is no longer a traitor. I am no longer a traitor. And Sam Houston, a man who Houston, Texas is named after, stood strong in his conviction. He was the president of the nation of Texas. He was the governor of Tennessee and the governor of Texas. But when it came time to separate from the Union, he would not go along with it. And people, Southerners and Texans, called him a traitor. But at the end of the day, history judged Sam Houston for being a man of courage. And so, for all of our warriors who are listening to the briefing room, I leave you with this thought today: be a person of courage. In the words of President John F. Kennedy, courage is the most important virtue. Thank you for watching the briefing room, a show by Warriors for Warriors, and we'll see you next week here, same time, same channel.